Smalls, the hit that was released on March 1st, 1997. 8 days after the single hit the stores, though, Biggie was gunned down in Los Angeles.
The Biggie Smalls mystery finally solved and isn't good.
One of the most high-profile rapper assassinations in history. He launched a record label that dominated the charts and redefined the rap genre.
Biggie Smalls was born Christopher George Wallace on May 21, 1972 in Brooklyn, New York, raised in the heart of Bedford-Stuyvesant. His mother, Voletta Wallace, was a Jamaican immigrant who worked as a preschool teacher. His father left when Biggie was just 2 years old. From that point on, it was just him and his mother. They lived in a small apartment on St. James Place. Money was tight, the streets were rough, and by age 12, Biggie was already writing rhymes in a school notebook. He was smart, but he got bored fast. By his teenage years, he was skipping school, hustling on the corner. His mom didn't know what was happening at first. She thought he was hanging with friends, but Biggie was already in deep. He had the voice, and even before he had a deal, he had a following. Tapes of his street freestyles started spreading around Brooklyn. By 17, he had dropped out of school, and by 19, he was arrested for weapons charges. And when he finally picked music, the world would never be the same. But the street never let go, and that shadow followed him until the very end. But that was only the beginning. Biggie's last days were filled with tension, and the more you look at what happened, the more it feels like he was walking into a trap. Just weeks earlier, he had been in Las Vegas, less than 2 months after Tupac died. People assumed the beef had cooled down, but it hadn't. Biggie was still being blamed by many fans for Tupac's death, even though Biggie wasn't even in Vegas that night. Still, the East Coast-West Coast rivalry was alive, and Biggie knew it. He started limiting his public appearances. He stuck close to people he trusted, but not all of them were loyal. Some of the same people seen partying with Biggie in LA were later accused of playing both sides. They showed up in photos with rival crews. They had ties to both Bad Boy Records and Death Row. One of them was even being paid by both camps at the same time. Biggie didn't know that. During one phone call, he reportedly told a friend he didn't like how quiet things had gotten. He said it felt too calm. And just days before the Soul Train party, he asked for his security team to double-check every detail. But even with all those precautions, the car that pulled up next to him that night had a clear path. No one stopped it. No license plate was tracked. No arrests were made. And people who were there suddenly didn't remember much. Even stranger, parts of the case file went missing in the weeks that followed. But behind closed doors, Biggie's inner circle was falling apart. Some stopped answering calls. Others moved out of LA completely. And one person, who had been by Biggie's side that weekend, vanished from the public eye entirely. To this day, their name hasn't come up again in any official report, and no one seems to know why. What happened in Las Vegas might have been the spark, but what happened in Los Angeles lit the fire. Biggie didn't just go to LA for music. He went because his label pushed him to. Executives said it was time to repair his image. They told him to show his face, do interviews, and promote the album. But the timing was strange. The West Coast was still mourning Tupac. The streets were still tense, and people were still pointing fingers. So why send Biggie right into the middle of it? That decision has never made sense, especially because Biggie himself didn't want to go. He had reportedly told people in his crew that the trip felt off, but he was under contract, and the label wanted him there. They booked him at the Peterson Automotive Museum party on March 8th. Everyone knew he'd be there. There was no mystery. He had become a walking target. And while he was doing interviews and smiling for photos, others were watching from the outside. Multiple cars were spotted circling the event that night, but no one followed up. But the strangeness didn't stop there. When police began reviewing footage and questioning people, gaps started appearing. Days following Biggie's death, the hotel room was cleaned out, not by his family, but by someone else. Unreleased music, private notebooks, and financial records were missing, and no one could explain who took them or why. It looked less like a random act of violence, and more like someone knew exactly what they were doing. After Biggie's death, everyone expected his estate to be massive. He had sold millions of records, royalties still pouring in. But when his mother, Voletta Wallace, began reviewing the finances, she was stunned. The money wasn't there, statements were missing, contracts were incomplete, and key documents couldn't be found. Biggie had been signed to Bad Boy Records, but the exact terms of his deal were unclear. Some paperwork showed he owned parts of his publishing. Other files said he didn't. No one could explain the difference. When lawyers tried to do a full audit, they ran into roadblocks. Some accounts were frozen, others had already been emptied. Millions of dollars were unaccounted for, and nobody seemed responsible. Even stranger, some of Biggie's belongings were never returned to his family. Jewelry, hard drives, and recording tapes. One studio reported that Biggie had stored backup sessions in a private vault, but when it was opened after his death, it was empty. People started asking questions. Where did the money go? Why were there no clean records? One theory pointed to people inside the label. Another suggested outside investors had started moving assets before news of his death even broke. Even Biggie's mother said in interviews that she felt like people were hiding something, and she wasn't the only one. Behind the scenes, quiet lawsuits were being filed, private settlements were made, and the deeper they looked, the more it became clear Biggie's empire had been drained before it ever had a chance to grow. After Biggie died, the music world mourned. But behind the scenes, business started booming. Within weeks, his posthumous album, Life After Death, went multi-platinum. It sold faster than anything Biggie had ever released. Everything connected to Biggie's name became profitable, but critics pointed out that Biggie's estate saw only a fraction of the money it generated. Some insiders claimed Biggie had been planning to leave Bad Boy, that he was considering starting his own label. He had even mentioned it in interviews. He wanted full control, and that move could have changed everything. If Biggie had gone independent, the people around him stood to lose millions. They all had something to lose. And that makes the timing of his death even more suspicious, especially when you consider what happened just days after he died. A new distribution deal was signed using his posthumous album, and once again, the people who benefited most were the ones closest to him. In the weeks after Biggie's death, investigators came across something unexpected: a lease agreement. It wasn't for his home. It wasn't connected to his studio. It was for a small apartment, registered under a different name. The address was in a quiet building, far from his usual spots. Even close friends had never heard of it. It wasn't listed on any official paperwork tied to Bad Boy or his business team, but inside that apartment, there were signs Biggie had been spending time there. It looked like a hideout. Some believed he used it to escape pressure from the spotlight. Others think it was something more: a safe house, a place to keep sensitive files away from industry eyes. There were whispers that Biggie was working on side deals, that he was recording songs meant for his own independent label. One friend claimed Biggie stored early versions of unreleased tracks there, and possibly paperwork showing he was planning to split from his management. But when the apartment was searched, most of that material was gone. The only thing left was a stack of business cards, some with names no one recognized. It felt like someone was trying to erase something that Biggie wanted to keep off the radar. And whatever was inside that apartment, it disappeared without a trace. Not long after Biggie's passing, his family was allowed to collect his personal items. There was one thing they were most concerned about: a safe. Biggie had reportedly kept it hidden in his Brooklyn home. Only a few people knew the combination. According to friends, it wasn't just for money. It held unreleased music, contracts, and photos. But when the safe was opened, it just had a single envelope containing old receipts. Everything else was gone. No official report was ever filed about the missing contents. It just vanished from the story. But here's the thing: some of the jewelry that disappeared showed up in public months later, worn by people Biggie once trusted. The chains, the rings, even the watch. And still nobody was charged. And that possibility has changed how fans and his family see everything that came after. At first, there were witnesses, people at the scene, people in the cars, people who said they saw everything. But within weeks, the stories started changing. Some claimed they couldn't remember details. Others flat out denied what they'd originally said. One man who was with Biggie that night gave a full statement, then disappeared. Another witness, tied to a security company that worked the event, vanished from the case entirely. Her file was removed from the active investigation. And when Biggie's family asked why, they got silence. Even worse, several parts of the case file were sealed without notice. When independent investigators tried to request them, they were told the case was still open, so nothing could be released. But behind the scenes, leaks started to emerge. A former detective claimed the department had internal conflicts, that there were officers with connections to known figures in the music industry, and that one of the prime suspects had ties to both security firms and a rival label. At one point, a retired cop came forward saying the real answers were buried on purpose, that Biggie's death wasn't random, and that someone powerful wanted the truth to stay buried. One thing is clear: the people who could have helped solve this case either changed their story, disappeared, or were silenced. After all the fame, the music, and the headlines, what's left is a chilling reality. Biggie Smalls didn't just die in a drive-by. He died in a storm of secrets, silence, and profit. His warnings were ignored, his music was taken, and the people who should have protected him either vanished or cashed in. The police never solved the case. Key witnesses walked away, files were sealed, and the trail went cold, but not because it couldn't be solved, because no one in power wanted it to be. The more you look, the more it feels like Biggie's death wasn't just a loss. A move that cleared the path for careers to explode. A move that made millions off the voice of a man who never got to speak for himself. And as the years went on, the truth stayed hidden. Not by accident, but by design. Fans still celebrate his legacy. But behind the tracks is a story that was never finished. One filled with missing music, lost money, erased files, and people who knew too much. Biggie once said he was ready to die, but what he didn't know is how fast the world would try to erase everything he built, and how deep the mystery would go long after he was gone. Share your thoughts on Biggie's legacy in the comments below, and if you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for further updates.